Okay, so we back with another one, right? Right now we on the Library of Congress government website. It's breaking down the Civil Rights Act of 1994 and everything that led up to it. So while the current administration is trying to whitewash, trying to get rid of evidence of their racist ways, they even probably going as far as they might have even been doing that bullshit on the Biden low key. So don't get me up as, oh, he's a Democrat or he's a Republican. I don't trust none of these devils. Let that be clear. Because in the years from 1865 to now, the white people, the Democrats, the white Democrats, who will say that, oh, um, it was the Republicans working against you. Well, y'all white like the people on the other side is white. So you trying to say that y'all so helpless that y'all couldn't stop the racist whites on that side from doing us dirty continuously? Out of here. And the same thing for the Republicans. Oh, the Democrats, they're racist. Nigga, I know they racist. But y'all trying to say that y'all was so helpless that y'all couldn't stop the racist Democrats from doing what they did to us. So once again, both of y'all niggas is evil. And the analogy I gotta use, as graphic as it may seem, proves a point. If somebody assaulted your mother and there were two guys in the room, one guy did it, but the other guy just sat by and watched, who the is in the wrong? Who is truly the evil person? Who's the good person in that equation? I'm gonna give you the answer. Both of them is wrong, and both of them evil. And by making it a more personal analogy, you will come to that line of thinking, because the person who did it, they definitely gonna get that wrath. But the person who was a bitch ass nigga who sat on the side and looked and felt in their heart of hearts that it shouldn't have been done, but still didn't try to intervene to any level, slavery, lynchings, etc. Jim Crow 1.0, Jim Crow 2.0, we in Jim Crow 3.0. Out of here, nigga. I can't fuck with none of y'all. Somebody said, if America didn't want drugs in America, there would be none. I agree with that 100%. If America didn't want injustice, there would be none. What we perceive as injustice is baked into the fabric of what this shit was supposed to be, a white supremacist haven. The 10% or less of the global population of Caucasians to call home. Let's get into the long list of things documented in the Library of Congress, for the United States leading up to that act. So in 1640, you have a Negro indentured servant. Brother John Punch was supposed to have only did a short bid in slavery, and then he would have been free and on his way to living his life. But he ran away and received a life sentence in Virginia. His white counterparts, this goes back to everybody was a slave. His white counterparts, the white slaves that you always reference but never reference directly and specifically and when and where, only received a 3-year sentence for trying to run away. 1641, as you see, Massachusetts authorized slavery with legislation. So not only did they say it, we're going to do this, they put it on the books as official laws in the state of Massachusetts. 1660, Virginia specifically punished indentured servants who ran away with Negro slaves. So now in Virginia, the fact that they're emphasizing ran away with Negro slaves, put your fucking thinking cap on. They're talking about white slaves, punishing the white slaves who tried to escape along with the regular slaves. You feel me? 1662, Virginia determined birthright of Negroes based on the status of the mother rather than the father, as had been the British custom for centuries. Now, they determining the birthright on the mother, who was 9 out of 10 times violated by the white slave master. So, of course, the offspring is going to be classified under the mother rather than the father based on what we're seeing here in this 1662 situation here. Virginia also enacted the first major slave codes, how to treat slaves, how to punish them, all of that type of shit fit into the parameters of these slave codes. What the slaves can do, where they can go. 1705, Virginia regulated slaves, Indians, and mulattoes to the status of property. The mulattoes are the modern day Hispanics, depending on where you are in the world. They were still property, along with fully melanated ancestors, along with the Indians, who were also ancestors. That's 1705. 1776, Declaration of Independence signed. 1781, Quark Walker versus Jennison in Massachusetts relied on the Declaration of Rights, which ultimately led to the abolition of slavery in 1783. 1785, New York passed legislation for the gradual emancipation of slaves. 1788, the U.S. Constitution is ratified by 11 states. 1789, George Washington, a slave owner, inaugurated as the first president of the United States. 1789. 1791, you have the Bill of Rights added to the U.S. Constitution. 1820, you have the Missouri Compromise, which created rules for the expansion of slavery into Western territories and prohibited slavery north of the 3630 latitude, except in Missouri. 1841, former President John Quincy Adams defended Africans aboard the Spanish ship Amistad, which was made into a very popular movie. I think it might even won a little, award or two that year. 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 required citizens to assist in the return of escaped slaves to their owners. So not only is the original slave owner doing the up shit, this act forced other whites to participate in this maintaining of white supremacy and slavery. See, when white people try to say, oh, black people could be racist, no. Black people can be prejudiced. White people have demonstrated step by step that they're racist. When you're passing laws, legislation, acts to ensure that a group of people stay in a up state of life or the quality of life, that's racism. That's showing power behind the dislike. I could dislike you all day, but I don't have the power to do acts, treaties, ordinances, regulations, shit like that to have you up on top of me not liking you. But we have never had the power, because that's what racism is. It's not only one group disliking another, but it's having the power to attack or affect that other group in a way that you normally wouldn't be able to do it under other conditions. So with prejudice, oh, I don't like him because he's dark, or I don't like him because he's white. That's just mere opinion. Racism is, I don't like that nigga, let's go hang him. Matter of fact, we got the sheriff on board. We're going to print an article in the newspaper, talk about how much fun we had at the lynching, and at the state, county, federal level, there was never a repercussion to any of these devils who murdered our ancestors. That's racism. That's systemic racism. That's a power component to not only liking someone, along with the whole eugenics of the scientific, how can we get rid of all these niggas conundrum that these devils faced after 1865 when they realized that the show was over. They literally bred our ancestors like livestock. So all of this think tank bullshit of there's too many people, overpopulation, that wasn't even an equation prior to slavery ending. They would have bred us to the point where we would have probably been, you know, 9/10 of the whole Earth population if we were under white control. And there would have never been a talk of a overpopulation. The moment niggas got free, oh, now there's too many people. These are fucking dots you gotta put together. You gotta use discernment and your own research. You gotta put all that shit together to figure out, do this shit really make sense? We got the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which repealed the Missouri Compromise, allowing slavery in the Northern Territories. So that's 1854. That's not that far off. I skipped 1850. Roberts versus the City of Boston, Massachusetts, found no constitutional impediment to segregated schools. The fact that these devils had to go to the lengths to make sure that black kids and white kids didn't even get the same education, it shows the insecurity, because if we were genetically inferior, then there shouldn't have been this big push to try to even prevent us from being in the same educational facilities as them. We should have just naturally fell off because we are, 3/5 of a person and got the IQ of a monkey, dropped out on our own accord because we just couldn't take the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s. That shit was just too complicated for niggas. They passed these laws because during the slavery time, where it was illegal for our ancestors to read and write, if we were put in the same room with these Caucasians and given the same material to learn and study and or blah blah blah, our brilliance would shine through, and that's what they didn't want to see. They didn't want you to see that a lot of these niggas was more brilliant than any of these white people could ever be. So we move on to 1857, the Dred Scott versus Sanford decision based out of Missouri. It declared that all blacks, slaves as well as free, were not and could never become United States citizens. So around the same time that this is going on, from 1850 and even earlier, 1790, in my other video where I break down the Naturalization Act of 1790, the Mexicans were considered or classified as white in America at this same time. So when I hear, Mexicans trying to flex and like dumbass niggas, I hate to say it, in positions of government and all this, talking this people of color talk, no nigga, you got life fucked up. And I'm even holding you on some contempt type shit. You a fucking traitor, my nigga, because history shows us time and time again there's never a concept as a people of color, meaning the black people have always been persecuted alone. The black people have always, since the inception of the United States, been at the bottom of the caste system. Peep my America caste system video on YouTube. The beauty of America was set up so that all these other different groups can come to America and live a better quality of life than from where they came, because a lot of them were treated like trash at the fucking bottom of society where they came from. But when they came to America, you have a black American class that serves as the worst or the lowest level of society. So any new group coming from Europe and even certain parts of South and Central America, they're going to be persecuted by the high white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They're going to be discriminated upon and shitted upon for a time but they all received their white card down the line, and they all was educated in the dynamics of America. We're still better than black people because we still have been afforded more rights and liberties and luxuries than black people. We have always served as the bottom of society. You feel me? So there was never such thing as a black and brown coalition. Are there Mexicans or people from Puerto Rico or people from Cuba that empathize with our plight and all that shit? I'm sure there are, but there's way more that got their white card and decided to roll and work on behalf of white supremacy. So as we scroll through here, 1862, federal emancipation of slaves in D.C. 1863, Emancipation Proclamation took effect. You have the Fugitive Slave Act repealed in 1864. 1865, the 13th Amendment to the United States abolishes slavery. But not all the states got that fucking email. So also in 1865, you have the act to establish a bureau for the relief of freedmen and refugees. 1866, you have the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which guaranteed equal rights under the law for all people who live within the United States, the jurisdiction of the United States. That was a motherfucking lie. 1868, 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution granted citizenship to all people born or naturalized in the United States and prohibited states from denying any person the equal protection of the laws or depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. 1870, the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution granted African American men the right to vote. This is what I be saying when I be trying to talk to y'all. A lot of these Negroes got like the perpetuating a lie about your ancestors died for the right to vote. No, that right was given by the 15th Amendment, 1870, right after the Civil War ended and the Emancipation Proclamation. We were voting, and during Reconstruction, we were in positions of power. We were, mayors, governors, all that type of wild shit in the South. And to end that run that we had, which was very brief, white supremacists, basically white supremacist Democrats who were aligned with the Klan, because you got to remember, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican who freed the slaves. The Democrats were like, fuck that shit. We need to get whites back in power positions within the southern states. So yeah, the rest of my thought, the ancestors who continued to vote themselves in positions of power, they died in multiple states and multiple elections towards the tail end of the 1880s and 90s, when the Klan was really full swing, to discourage black people from voting any further. Because if they couldn't vote, then they wouldn't continue to vote their people into power positions over whites. And a lot of these states, you will see documents and shit coming up in congressional records. We refuse, or we will no longer be governed by the blacks. Word for word. In 1870, 1871, you have 3 enforcement acts which gave the federal government substantial authority to prosecute those who violated the civil and political rights of African Americans. I hate even saying that term because for the longest we've been classified as Negro, Black, or colored. African American implies that we have a tie to Africa that we ain't had in centuries. We are Black Americans, period. This law especially targeted members of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, were they actually penalized, punished under the legal system? It's hard to say. I have to go back and dig deeper. But if we're judging it by how the white people, especially law enforcement, who are modern day Klan, are treated, I'd say very few. 1873 slaughterhouse cases limited the constitutional significance of the 14th Amendment's privileges and immunities clause by interpreting the clause as only protecting the rights of national citizenship from actions of state government. So basically, because the federal government say one thing, the state at the state level, we ain't gotta really do our hardest to try to provide a safe environment for these newly freed Negroes. Basically, 1873, Bradwell versus Illinois rejected a woman's claim that the 14th Amendment required the state to allow her to practice law in the first sexual discrimination case heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. 1875, Civil Rights Act of 1875 guaranteed African Americans equal treatment in public accommodations, public transportation, and prohibited their exclusion from jury service. So why so much emphasis placed on the Civil Rights Act of 1864 if I've just given you the history from the Library of Congress that we've had quite a few civil rights acts passed that clearly didn't stick then, but that's a question for another video. But a question for right now still is, who was the Civil Rights Act for? This is a rhetorical question. This act was for these white people who did not know how to fucking act civilly in treating other human beings as human beings. That's who these acts were for. Tell white people to stop being so fucking devilish. This goes back to the bullshit, right? This court case, 1875, Minor versus Happersett, Missouri. They held that a state could constitutionally forbid a woman from voting. It wasn't men as a whole that oppressed women. It was the white man who oppressed women collectively. See, that's what these feminists, and that's why feminists is white supremacist, another form of white supremacy. They try to get all women under this umbrella together. We strong together. We been oppressed. No, the white man been doing the oppression of everyone on the fucking planet. And the white woman, I hate to say it, your ass been sitting right there riding shotgun the whole way. These devils were so evil when other whites passed these acts to try to do the right thing and fall in line with natural law, in line with God, who they claim to worship and follow. Civil rights cases heard by the U.S. Supreme Court declared parts of the 1875 Civil Rights Act unconstitutional, including the prohibition of racial discrimination in inns, public conveyances, and places of public amusement. These niggas who claim to be high and mighty in the moral high ground literally declared basically equal treatment of black people to be unconstitutional. That's what they was trying to argue in 1883 in reference to the 1875 Civil Rights Act. So when I call y'all devils, you deserve it, my nigga. Y'all deserve it. But I didn't do anything wrong. But your grandfather did. Your great-great-grandfather did. And y'all niggas just, it's like, oh, well, that's a nigga problem. It's not mine, and went on with life. But want niggas in 2025 to ride for every fucking other group's cause when niggas didn't give no fuck about none of our causes. 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson in Louisiana. This case upheld the constitutionality of a Louisiana statute that required railroads to provide equal but separate accommodations for the white and colored races. But why is everything about race? On fucking episode 800 of Why is Everything About Race? This laundry list of court cases, acts, laws, different pieces of legislation written down by whites documenting how whites made everything about race in America. Stop playing these games. Unless y'all, you know, ain't too smart to read what your ancestors put down. I clearly understand word for word what they saying. If I can understand it and you can't, then who's the fucking dummy? So now we're back at the next phase of the game, segregation, aka Jim Crow. 1903, Giles versus Harris, Alabama. In this case, they refused to order the Board of Registers to register an African American to vote, in part because the court concluded that unless it could actually supervise elections, it was unable to force white Alabamans to allow African Americans to vote. 1906, Hodges versus United States. This was Arkansas. They reversed the conviction against whites who had ejected citizens of the United States of African descent from their jobs. The decision narrowed the Congressional Civil Rights Authority under the 13th Amendment. 1910, Franklin versus the state of South Carolina affirmed the judgment of the South Carolina Supreme Court to execute African American Pink Franklin for the killing of a white constable, H.E. Valentine. Franklin shot Valentine when he came to arrest Franklin for violating a peonage-based contract for work. Sound like a slavery type situation popping off. 1911, Bailey versus the state of Alabama invalidated based on the 13th Amendment, a law that facilitated debt peonage, a form of involuntary servitude, slavery. The year 1913, Gwynn versus United States, Oklahoma. It deemed that the state constitutional provisions permitting grandfather clauses for passing literacy tests as a voting requirement were unconstitutional, as they should. So you trying to tell me I can't vote because my grandfather couldn't read, nigga? 1917, Buchanan versus Worley, Kentucky, held residential racial segregation unconstitutional. 1920, 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution granted women the right to vote. Who did that? A bunch of white men. So back to y'all feminists. Oh, we were oppressed. You were oppressed by your motherfucker that you was sleeping with, the white man, who finally granted y'all the right to vote in 1920. 1927, Nixon versus Herndon, Texas. This act struck down a 1923 Texas law that prohibited blacks from voting in the Democratic Party primary. If we so inferior, why all this effort to try to keep us out of politics, to keep us out of voting? These devils were scared to death. That's what the problem was. We like as dirty as we done these niggas over these centuries. If they get even a sliver of power, ain't no telling what they gonna do to us. As they should be thinking, because they did so much dirty, foul shit to the ancestors. But only who do evil expect that evil to come back to them tenfold. And that's why they did everything in their power to try to stifle our shit after 1865. So who's the true savage? Because if we was really savage, we would have did what needed to be done out the gate, and there would be no back and forth. There would be no issues. (1932) Nixon versus Condon, Texas again. They declared that the prohibition of African Americans from the Democratic primaries by the Executive Committee were unconstitutional. 1935, Grovey versus Townsend, Texas. The ruling was that the members of the Democratic Party of Texas who assembled at a convention and made resolutions about those qualified to vote in the Democratic Party were a private group, and that barring all but white citizens was not an act of the state and therefore not in violation of the 14th and 15th Amendments. For these fucking mind control brainwashed Negroes out here who've been thinking Democrat is the only way, and blah blah blah. A lot of these things are telling you it was the Democrats who blocked niggas from fucking voting, trying to use every loophole they could. These are the same niggas in bed with the Klan, and this is why I could never vote Democrat again ever in life. 1935, Pearson versus Murray, Maryland. Daniel Gaines Murray, an African American, was admitted to the University of Maryland Law School when the Maryland Court of Appeals concluded that the state had failed to provide Murray with a separate but equal education. 1938, Missouri, ex-rel. Gaines versus Canada, and this happened in Missouri. Supreme Court held that states providing a law school for white students were constitutionally required to provide in-state education for African American students as well, either by integrating the state law school or creating a separate school for African Americans. 1939, creation of the Civil Liberties Unit, later renamed the Civil Rights Section of the Department of Justice, the first federally funded entity tasked with the protection of civil rights since Reconstruction. So basically 1870 to like 1880, maybe 85, 90-ish. So they finally trying to circle back on actually backing up what they set out to do. They put it down on paper, yeah, niggas should be treated equally and yada yada, but they ain't never back that shit up or try to enforce that shit. 1941, an executive order 8802 prohibited racial discrimination in the national defense industry in response to the intended first march on Washington. And this was Roosevelt who signed that order. Executive Order 9066 designated much of the West Coast a military area and ordered more than 100,000 Japanese Americans to relocate and live in internment camps. That was 1942 under Roosevelt's administration once again. 1944, Smith versus Allwright, Texas. This case overturned the Democratic Party's use of all-white primaries in Texas and other states. They overturning all of this shit that the Democrats was doing to keep your black ass out, your black grandmother out, your great grandmother out. But magically in 1964, Around the time Martin Luther King and Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, niggas been fucking diehard, dedicated Democrats without knowing the fucking history of what they dealing with. 1944, Korematsu versus United States, California. This case upheld the right to exclude Japanese Americans, even though in a separate case it found that the relocation camps were unconstitutional. So once again, these devils just doubling and tripling down. We know we doing wrong, but we still doing it. That's what the fuck is happening. And it's happening now too. 1946, Morgan versus Virginia found a Virginia law that required the races to be separated in all intra and interstate travel unconstitutional. Why did they have to pass this? Or why they have to have this court case? Because racist crackers was so honed in on race, because everything's about race with them, that they had to have a case in 1846 to say, no, y'all tripping, this shit is unconstitutional. But this is how serious these devils took racism. You know what I mean? Because everything's about race with them. Line by line, step by step, year by year, the fucking evidence is here. 1948, Shelley versus Kramer, Missouri, held that courts could not enforce racially restrictive covenants on real estate that prevented people of Negro or Mongolian race from buying or living in certain neighborhoods. So they doubled down. They said not only niggas, but basically no Asians can be living in certain neighborhoods or even purchase real estate, nigga. And this is 1948. Each state had its own bullshit. You know what I mean? So that's the pro and con of states' rights versus federal rights. While some people, respected that slavery should be abolished in certain states, other states was like, man, fuck that shit. We still slaving. You know what I mean? My great grandmother, rest her soul, Shorty told me that when she was a child, she was warned not to go to certain parts or towns over, from where she was at in Alabama, and she came up in Vernon County, Alabama, not to go to certain areas because they still had slaves illegally. My great grandmother was born in 1903. 1948, Perez versus Sharp, California. This was the first case in which a court invalidated a ban on interracial marriage when the California Supreme Court concluded that the ban violated the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. Why so many court cases? Because a lot of these devils were so focused on race, they made everything about race, which is why over time people had to fight these situations in court to undo or straight out repeal or abolish these caveman ways of thinking, these devilish ways of thinking, these devilish laws that they had in place. 1948, Executive Order 9980 prohibited discrimination in civilian agencies and instituted fair employment practices. This was under President Truman. So the fact that they had to sign an executive order tells you out the gate, leading up to this point in 1948, you trying to, a black man back then trying to apply for a government job, nah, nigga, beat it. Now we coming into the civil rights era. 1951, another executive order had to be pushed out. Executive Order 10308 created a committee on government compliance to enforce the prohibition of or the prohibition against employment discrimination by firms contracting or subcontracting government orders. The fact that these shits had to be created tells you motherfuckers were boxed out of doing business with the government from a contractor standpoint. But only if you work hard enough and roll your sleeves up, fuck out of here. If niggas is boxed out the whole employment situation, there ain't no building yourself up. Executive Order 10479 created the Government Contract Committee to replace the Committee on Government Compliance. That was in 1953 under Eisenhower. 1954 and in 1955, you had the Brown versus Board of Education. There were two separate trial situations. The first one, as we see here, held that public education and segregation of children in public schools solely on the basis of race, even though the physical facilities and other tangible factors were equal, deprived equal educational opportunities to the children of the minority group. 1955, the second case dealing with Brown versus Board of Education stated Southern schools should comply with the Brown 1 decision with all deliberate speed, which white Southerners understood as allowing them to resist and only symbolically comply with school desegregation. 1957, the Civil Rights Act of 1957 established the Civil Rights Commission to protect an individual's right to equal protection and protected some civil and voting rights, but it lacked substantial enforcement mechanisms. So now we're at the Civil Rights Act of 1957. These niggas got like 8 million civil rights acts, which brings me back to my original statement and question. Who was these civil rights acts for? It was for these white people to get their mind right and treat and behave like human beings, which they have failed to do, and treat other people as such. They had to be instructed by the government, act like a fucking human being, nigga, instead of a devil. That's what each and every one of these civil rights acts is saying. 1960, the Civil Rights Act of 1960 guaranteed qualified voters the right to register to vote in any state and the right to sue a state official or acting state official who prevented them from voting. 1961, Executive Order 10925 created the Committee on the Equal Opportunity to combat discrimination in government employment and in employment stemming from government contracts. 1961, Monroe versus Pape revitalized Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act of 1871 by allowing individuals to sue government actors for violation of civil rights. 1962, Executive Order 11063 banned racial discrimination in federally funded housing. This was also done by President Kennedy. 1963, Equal Pay Act required employers to pay all employees equally for equal work, regardless of whether the employees are male or female. Once again, feminists, this shit is telling you step by step who the fuck was really oppressing you. It wasn't all men, it was the white man, the one that you've been fucking and sucking on this whole time. 1963, Executive Order 11114 extended guarantees against employment discrimination to federally assisted contracts in the construction industry. This was also done under President Kennedy. So when you think of construction, you think in labor unions and shit like that. A lot of times the unions were formed as a direct result of all of these slaves being freed. You had highly skilled workers who were working for no pay, released into the general population, and these white immigrants, along with the whites who might have already been here, who don't got the skill or half-ass skill, have to compete directly with motherfuckers who, if they built master's house wrong or fucked up this or fucked up that, they was gonna dangle, nigga. So they had no choice to be precise with what the fuck they were doing. They had to be a master or expert at what they was doing, because there was an immediate and severe consequence to failure. These free whites didn't have such pressures to be the best at what they did. So once these niggas was unleashed into the workforce, them white people formed labor unions to keep niggas out. End of story. Boom. Here we go. 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination in public accommodations and employment. It authorized the Attorney General to bring school desegregation suits and the federal government to withdraw funds from schools and other governmental entities receiving federal funds if they discriminated, and provided enhanced enforcement mechanisms for protecting civil and voting rights. So, for the people in the comments, I expect the devils to be on they shit in the comments, step by step, court case by court case, act by act. Black people have literally paved the way for every other minority group that came after to live a much better life in America. 1965. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 enforced the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution and provided for substantial federal supervision of voting and election procedures in order to eliminate racial discrimination and protect the right to vote. 1965, Executive Order 11246 authorized federal agencies to enforce the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that was under Lyndon B. Johnson. 1968, Civil Rights Act of 1968 provided for equal housing opportunities regardless of race, creed, or national origin, and made it a federal crime to injure or intimidate anyone because of their race, color, religion, or national origin. Let's stay right there for a moment. So this is almost 20 years after the first subdivision was, community, Levittown, Long Island, I believe 1951. A lot of people that was even able to slide into those first subdivisions were white soldiers, white Americans who were able to use their GI Bill funding to take advantage of obtaining homes. They say that at least 90 to 95% of the GI Bill funds, they were utilized by white Americans. Black Americans were boxed out of using those same military funds to get them homes. So you have basically a 20-year gap because these white people that went to World War II weren't luxurious. Most of them weren't rich. They were in the same boat as, the African American population, however you want to call it, had just came up out of the damn Great Depression. Everybody was poor. So let's not, have this fairy tale that white people were just popping and, oh yeah, yeah, and then when the first homeless came, we just went and got one. No, after going and putting your life on the line in World War II, and you came back in one piece, and you was able to take that GI Bill funds to get you a car and get you a home, as opposed to fucking scraping by in the city, situation where you was living next door to door, to the niggas that was already in the hood, next to the Jews, the Irish, and everybody else on some gangs of New York shit when it was white on white killing and white on white crime. The fact that they had to state that it was a federal crime to injure or intimidate anyone from trying to get a home or, equal housing opportunities. A lot of these subdivisions, probably up until the late 1980s, probably damn even the 90s, had white only clauses in them. HOAs, all that shit. You cannot buy a home here if you are not white. That's in direct violation of the 1968 Civil Rights Act. So if I got a boatload of money but I can't buy a home, and they say the home is the best investment, I can't build generational wealth. And that was what was purposely done there, for them to even have to create this act, because they understood it at some level too. In the same time period, they also had to pass executive orders against ageism, sex discrimination. 1968, Jones versus Alfred H. Mayer in Missouri prohibited purely private discrimination in the sale or rental of property. 1968 as well, Green et al. Versus County School Board of New Kent County, Virginia. They reversed the decision of the Virginia Court of Appeals that supported separate schools for whites and blacks. I keep telling y'all, Virginia is the Missouri of the North. Well, shit, I don't know. At this point, Boston might be, but Virginia's a goddamn second runner up. 1969, Executive Order 11478 required equal opportunity and affirmative action programs in all federal agencies. That was under President Nixon. 1972, the Equal Opportunity Act amended the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to apply to local, state, and federal governments and allow the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to bring suits itself. So women, gays, people that might be disabled, all of these additional groups were able to fight their injustices on the strength of battles that we had to fight even earlier. Boy, when you look at the actual laws passed and shit, the motherfuckers who claim to be so pure and wholesome and Christ-like and all this shit, and they had to pass a law to provide education to handicapped children and require all public schools to accept federal funds to provide equal access to education, to children with physical and mental disabilities. These are the same devils who was talking that Uberman, whatever the fuck, super soldier shit, that Captain America type talk, eugenics. These are the same that were throwing away their own babies if they had any imperfections. These are that threw their children in psychiatric centers and left them to die right away. These are that these civil rights acts needed to be for. 1978 Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978 prohibited employment discrimination against female workers who are or intend to become pregnant, including discrimination in hiring, failure to promote, and wrongful termination. After the Supreme Court held in 1974 that pregnancy discrimination was not a form of sex discrimination. I'm done today.